what country?
New York.
Amazing. How did you find it?
Uh, well, I moved there effectively in 1979.
The novelty is worn off.
Well, no, I wouldn't live anywhere else. I just like the place and the noise and the bustle.
I was there about a year. Oh, sorry, there's your water. I was there about a year ago. I stayed at the Lower East Side.
This is drooping, I think.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Bloody hell, John, let me down. Either my grip isn't what it used to be, or this is a. I don't want to get the other one because this should not be drooping. There we go. It's getting to be my grip. That's
Okay.
absolutely fine. Let me know if it's lower enough.
Some goodies there, by the way.
Oh, excellent. We'll have a proper look at this. Andrew, my colleague outside there, his eyes just widened when I mentioned Soft Cell and Tainted Love. It's the first single he ever bought.
Oh.
It's an absolute massive fan.
Yeah, we never realised it would go that far.
I saw this online. I love the cover for this.
Yeah, that's a very clever one.
Amazing. It's really cool. I have probably these shortly.
There's full details online. That one has a huge booklet in it.
Excellent. I have a proper look at that as well. I was on your website a couple of weeks ago having a look. Gee, you're a busy man.
Well, I could retire, but
no,
I don't really care to.
Yeah. No, there's no need to. What was I going to say? I suppose we'll kind of almost do this chronologically if it suits you. So first of all, I suppose for this specific documentary, I know obviously you've been working years before this. And what I'd love to talk about in chronologically is kind of working with Soft Cell and Tainted Love, working with Bronski Beat, specifically on Age of Consent, and then focusing on two particular songs. So we'll talk about Small Town Boy, which is a big chunk of my documentary, and the second half of it, and Why as well. Just like to ask you a bit about the production of the start of it, and then a little bit about the Communards, kind of Jimmy and Richard's kind of dynamic of what Richard brought to the Communards. I'm interviewing Richard next week, hopefully, and kind of I suppose kind of that success. And what's interesting as well is biggest selling single of 1981, Tainted Love, and biggest selling single of 86, which is Don't Leave Me in the Sea, which is great. But anyway, we'll get into more of that in a second. I suppose Soft Cell, how did you come about meeting them?
I'll pause so I get a coherent sentence together. You'll be cutting in.
Very soundbitey. That would be great, actually.
Okay. Well, I was just introduced by London Records, and I broke my own rule by not actually meeting the band before going into the studio with them. But I heard the demo, which sounded marvellous. His voice sounded marvellous. So I met them at the studio, and off we went.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the demo? That kind of, especially I suppose that kind of infectious sample, that kind of sound, was that already on the demo?
No, it wasn't. That was a concoction I made with a delay line in an extreme setting. The initial sound was just a rather insipid artificial snare, but I fed it through the delay line, fiddled around a bit, and out came the bink bink, which Apple sort of appropriated later on.
Which noise?
The bink noise that starts the whole thing.
Yes. Oh my God! If you got royalties for that, my friend,
it would be good. I still have the original unit.
Do you?
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you just about if you could have a chat with me just about the technology used to make that record, and feel free to get technical.
With Tainted Love now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was one of the very early drum machine, as we used to call them, productions, and they developed everything with their own, but it was busted at the time. So for a bit of star quality, I borrowed Kit Haynes, which was just it was literally a rhythm box, about 6 inches in a cube, and all the sounds came out of one socket. So we had to separate the kick and the snare just by equalizing and putting them on different tracks. It was extremely primitive.
Was it time consuming?
No, it was extremely fast because we didn't have any options to worry about.
Now, I was reading a really kind of tidy little Guardian article about Dave Bowell and Mark Almond were talking about just the making of Tainted Love, and Dave Bowell said essentially he's really cheap Korg synths, and you had I can never pronounce it right. Synclavier, is it?
Synclavier.
Synclavier, I can never pronounce sorry, which is worth about 120 grand. Am I right in thinking that back then?
I calculated that eventually I spent 120,000 on the system. At that point, it was at a lower stage of development, but I brought it over to London to do a feature film score, and it happened to be around, so what else?
Can you explain for the Radio 2 listener what that machine is and give it its name?
The Synclavier was made by New England Digital, which was a company out of Vermont in the northeast of the United States. It was really the very first FM digital synthesizer, and it started out with just the sounds, which in fact are the Tainted Love sounds, just generated purely from digital scratch. Later it went on to be an all-singing, all-dancing recording studio with 16 tracks straight to disc. They were one of the first people to do that also.
And did it come down, is it like computers, did it just halve in price over the years?
I still have the original version, except it's like a broom. The handle and the head have been replaced, but let me rethink that one. Sorry, ask me the question again.
Yeah, sure. Do you still, I suppose the thing I was going to ask is, obviously it costs so much to begin with. Do you still, how much would they cost? Did it come down in price an awful lot, like computers?
Well, nowadays you can get the same machine, that's the FM synthesizer section of it, as a plug-in in Pro Tools, which is low three figures, I think, in cost. In those days, when I first bought the first system, it was £10,000. I was on contract at EMI at the time on a retainer and percentage, and I think I spent my whole year's retainer on it.
And going back, I suppose, to that specific song, Tainted Love, did Mark and Dave have the specific brief? Did they know how they wanted it to sound, or were they very much were they happy for you to give, feedback?
There were two aspects of it. Mark gave me a very detailed layout of the structure and how they wanted it to go between Tainted Love and Where Did Our Love Go. They were very, very clear about that as DJs. They understood segue and they understood what worked after what. In terms of sound, Dave's little bass machine worked very well indeed. And then there was Kit's drum box and then the Synclavier. We really just started and took it from there. We knew that the bassist was the drum machine and the bass, and Mark's voice, of course. But I just played around with sounds and found something that everybody liked, and off we went.
Now, on that as well, just while we're kind of talking, at what point when you're kind of in the studio and putting it together, did you realise that it was, first of all, was it different than what you'd produced previously? Was everything kind of going that direction anyway, style-wise for you? But at what point did you think, oh, this is something I'm going to be talking about in 20 years, 30 years' time?
Well, first of all, I was always trying to find something different. A lot of producers have a hit and then mine the same scene for decades and decades and decades. So it was very refreshing to hear that. We knew we'd done something reasonably well, and one sign was at about 3 o'clock in the morning when we were just finishing the mix, which was there was a lot of manual stuff in the mix as well as there was a lot of manual action in the mix, rushing across the studio to change a delay setting or whatever, even though the desk itself was automated. In other words, it remembered fader moves. But I noticed at one point that everybody in the control room, and everybody had a knob or two assigned to them, we were all dancing. I noticed at 3 o'clock in the morning, so that was definitely a good sign. After we'd finished the mix and were feeling slightly pleased with ourselves, we kicked back and thought, yeah, this could at least be a cult single.
Excellent, and how right you were. Now, can you tell me what the trickiest part of putting that together was? Was the start of it, at the end of it? Was there a particular tricky part, or?
No, the track was a pleasure and a joy to record. It was just very straightforward. We got down to it. Even though they were relatively inexperienced, they were very professional in their approach to it and very enthusiastic, to such an extent that when we did the rough run-through of the vocal, just to get the settings right, Mark put everything into it, and he sang his little heart out. And the engineer was a little concerned because the needles were in the wrong place for him. But I heard something going on, which was raising the hairs on the forearm. And I said, no, leave them be, please. And we wound up using the run-through as the master.
And did you do it all in one take?
Yes.
Wow. Actually, if you could say that.
And Mark did the whole thing in one take, and it was the first take. And we tried doing it again afterwards, but nothing had that spontaneity and spark of the very first take, the very first run-through.
That's incredible. You answered a number of questions here. And again, just before we move on, I'm just kind of, for me personally anyway, listening to that song, it's the intro. It's just, it gets you kind of straight away. Is that something you did on purpose, or is that just how the track kind of...
That's how they delivered it, and it's derived from the original Gloria Jones track.
Fair enough. It's just a fantastic...
It's actually the same lick as the Gloria Jones track, but somewhat more relaxed.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just the song taking off itself. Obviously, you've mixed it, you've delivered it. It's up to the boys then to kind of promote it as such. Were you kind of shocked at how well it took off? Obviously, it was again, and were you shocked at the success?
Well, I never expected top single of the year, so I guess I was shocked. Yes, it was surprising, and I know that Mark and Dave had endless troubles because they were still living in Leeds, and they were under assault practically. People setting fire to their dustbin and all sorts of things. It was hard for them to walk down the street, and it was hard enough for me. The telephone would go in London, and all you'd hear at the other end would be giggling girls.
Their house in Leeds, because I heard about that, people putting glue and super glue in their locks and graffitiing their door. What was that in terms of how different they were? Like their act, how kind of against the norm it was?
I don't think it was because of the different act, but there's the old thing that, there's the old thing of the boyfriend will impress the girlfriend by going and beating up a band member after the gig. That goes back generations and generations, and this is a version of that.
Kind of pulling people's hair to let them know you fancy them, kind of thing, is it?
No, just groups have always been a target.
I get you. Then, if you could just let me know, kind of like, at what point did you find out about it being the biggest selling single in 1981? And if you could start with when I found, or just I kind of want to put that into the...
I can't remember when it hit the top, and I kept calling the record company on chart day and then discovering it was still at number one. And this went on for quite a few weeks. In terms of when it was the biggest selling single of the year, I don't know. It was nice for the bank balance, but really for me, record sales is just a form of applause.
And just on kind of sales, I just think it's a really interesting fact. So the 7-inch, as you probably well know, was packaged. They kind of split up the way, obviously, you guys had done the full 12-inch version. So we had the Tainted Love on one side, and you had, was it Where Did I Love Go?
Yes.
On the other. And Mark has been, it was said again, it was in that Guardian article where he said like they missed out on millions in songwriting royalties, because what people normally do is put a B-side. Do people put a B-side on the... What do people normally do to kind of cash it out, to make sure they get their royalties if they do a cover?
The typical thing would be, if you had a cover on the A side, the typical thing would be to put your own song on the B side, even though it was probably just a throwaway. That was normal business back then.
Yeah, I think they really missed a trick on that one, because obviously it sold so well. It has been sampled an awful lot. Do you know off the top of your head how many times it's been sampled, or is there any specific memorable samples that you've heard?
Not really, but every so often I hear a record with that bink noise in it. And of course Rihanna went and did the whole thing, which was very nice for the bank balance too.
And Marilyn Manson's cover, what did you think of that?
I can't remember it, but That probably says it all.
I love it. It's actually, you know, it's not. It's slowed down a little bit, obviously to make it scarier for Marlon, but it kind of works. I think Pussycat Dolls covered it as well in their typical kind of very tame, whitewashed way. I suppose moving on to Bronski Beat. You worked a lot with London Records, did you? Because I talked to Colin last week. I call him now.
Yeah, yes.
London Records. Did you work a lot specifically with London, or were you working across all record labels?
London Records at that point had Tracy Bennett as head of A&R, and Roger Ames was in the adjoining office as head of Phonogram. And they were quite adventurous, especially Mr. Bennett. And they used to throw all sorts of things at me. Roger Ames paid me the compliment once that could throw all sorts of unlikely things at me, and you'd always get something usable back. And this, I suppose, fell into that category.
And can you remember being introduced to the band, and what were your initial thoughts of Bronski Beat?
I went down to Bronski Beat's rehearsal, which was at Heaven in Victoria, and heard them play a set and met them, enjoyed them. Just very, very straightforward, very pleasant people, and again, even though relatively inexperienced, very professional and thoughtful to work with.
And do they stand out from other artists that you've worked with, or in what way do you think they stood out?
Well, there weren't many other artists who were 5'2" Glaswegians singing in falsetto.
I was going to say, and when you actually finally got them into the studio, they would have sent you, or London Records would have sent you a demo, did they, of Small Town Boy? Was that correct?
You know, you asked me, and I can't quite remember. If I've got it, it'll be back in New York.
I was going to ask you about that. Was that commercially released at all, that demo? Do you think?
I doubt it.
Yeah, that's so. I was talking to Colin. Colin is currently looking for it in his holiday home at the moment.
Oh.
So I'd love to put it on because I just think it's. So I really want to pay the song, kind of like it's due.
Well, I'm liable to see Steve while I'm over here, so I'll ask him also.
That would be amazing. Yeah, it'd be great. I think because I was looking on Discogs for it a couple of hours ago, and I think I might have seen something, but it might not be the proper demo. But could you just, for me, I suppose for the doc, just kind of describe your thoughts on the demo first of all?
Let me think about that one.
It's a long time ago. I understand how to do everything again.
And I'm trying to remember. Let me think. I'm trying to remember the stage setup too. You know, I can't remember the demo.
Don't stress. No, it's fine. It's fine.
I do remember one thing though.
Yep.
The demo did exist, and there was the move to record two versions of it. One with very minimal keyboards and Jimmy singing in a quasi-blues style, slow. And then there's the other one with the dance style that originally became known. And I suggested that we could possibly combine these two. And as the 12-inch, it started out with the bluesy stuff and then sped up and then hit the stride and segued straight into the dance version. And that was quite difficult to do because in those days we synchronized to a click on tape. And I remember...
Go for it, sorry. And you worked a click track, was what you were saying.
Did you get the previous bit?
I did, but if you want to start again, that's absolutely fine.
Okay, we could do. The initial plan was to record, or the initial proposal was to record two versions of Small Town Boy. The first one would be slow and just a keyboard and Jimmy singing, and the second one would be the full-blown dance version. But I suggested that it might be possible, at the edges of technology, to record the whole lot in a segue. So we started off with the bluesy version and sped up to hit the tempo of the dance section. And that was done with very primitive technology. In those days, we used to synchronize the drum machine to a click, which was on tape. And we decided what was going to be the initial tempo and the end tempo, and then went through with the bass going down and a guide synthesizer going down at the same time. And we started off with the slow tempo, and there I was hanging on for dear life to the knob on the drum machine to get up to the right tempo at the right pacing, the right acceleration. Those were the days.
And how many, did that take a few takes?
There were 2 or 3 takes and a number of those shits.
Oh, we have to put that in, but oh well. What was I going to say? And then I suppose for me personally as well, like, I can't remember about the song. Jimmy's voice. So, like, was Jimmy always sang in a falsetto?
Mostly, yes.
And when, I suppose the big thing, the main reason they signed to London Records, from what Colin tells me, is that Colin had no plans to change them. They were like, we will let you do whatever you want to do and the way you want to do it. Can you kind of explain to me, like, recording Jimmy's falsetto? Did you have to set it up in any particular way, or was it easy enough to record?
It was easy enough to record, but I realised going into it that wrapping a track around that voice, an arrangement around that particular voice sound, was going